Welcome to Recombination Nation. Today we have an extraordinary guest. Gail Tverberg is originally trained as an actuary, but she developed a passion for studying the resources behind our economy and how our financial and political system is responding in rather strange and alarming ways to our civilization reaching resource limits. So that's kind of my quick introduction. I'll throw over to Gail and you can tell us a bit more about how you ended up on this path. Because I'm also interested in the human angle, like who are the people behind these perspectives?
Well, Shane, I've been an actuary, and so I was making forecasts in the insurance context. And I knew that people were talking about, well, we're going to have everlasting growth of whatever, 3, 4, 5%. We're going to have your investments are going to make several percent per year, and this is going to compound indefinitely. And it became obvious to me that any kind of resources in a finite world could not be going way up. And the population couldn't really be going up terribly rapidly for ever long either. So, anyhow, I started looking into it in 2005 when it started hitting the press. And I did get involved with the oil drum people not too much later than that. I actually had written a few articles that were more for the insurance press before that. And but my the site I started, the internet site I started was ourfiniteworld.com, and the focus was on the fact that we live in a finite world. And it doesn't matter what you do, if you have a bucket of sand and you take a teaspoon or a tablespoon and you take the tablespoon out, you're going to run out at some point. So it doesn't work very well. And we're dealing with that issue, whether it's fresh water or whether it's copper or if it's fossil fuels.
Interesting, interesting. And did you have like an aha moment or like an origin story, like turning point that you remember that where you suddenly became aware of this issue?
Well, I think I first read one of the books, I think it was a Jeremy Leggett book, uh, back in 2005, where they were talking about these issues. And and I think that was one of the first things I realized that, oh, yes, that's probably an issue. And so I started reading more about it and gradually picked up more of it.
Mm. And I really am surprised. Well, I'm no longer surprised by how often the people I talk to bring an outsider perspective to a field, and I wonder how being trained as an accurate actuary gave you a different tool set or mindset compared to, for example, like an economist who might, be classically trained to look at these kind of issues and reach different conclusions. Like, what advantages does being an accurate actuary give you?
Well, I guess an actuary looks at it from a different perspective. And I think part of what I got involved with was, using the internet and talking to other people. I can't say I'm trained in physics exactly, but other people started pushing me in that direction and saying, oh my, there's a physics problem here. You have to have fossil fuels, or you have to have supplementary energy of some kind for every part of GDP.
Mm.
And if you don't have enough of that relative to your population, you've got a big, big problem. And that's what people hadn't stopped to think about. You run into a problem even without peak oil. Peak oil probably pushes you over the edge, but you run into the problem long before that.
Yeah, yeah. It makes me wonder if you have a perspective on economics as a tradition that I've seen a lot of people argue that it's kind of like it's almost like a religion around industrial abundance, and that it has limited cultural capacity to like address these difficult questions.
Well, I get the feeling that the people who are in it are looking for models, simple models that will look nice to politicians and to the chairs of their economics department.
Yeah,
And they have to provide nice answers that will please people. They can't, you know, forecast anything too awful. So they definitely have stayed away from including energy in any of their models.
yeah.
They have all kinds of funny little devices they put in there to try to work around it.
Yeah, it's a fascinating. The sociology of economics as a profession is fascinating to watch. They're kind of the high priests of growth. I also wanted to ask, like I always come back to your website, Our Finite World, because you love digging into data and you go looking for the details and put them together and create a story and a model in a way that no one else does. But I wonder how reliable is that publicly available data? And do you suspect that it might decrease? Like, are we kind of exiting a golden age of access to that data to actually see what's happening in the world around us?
Well, you don't know. I mean, we have the statistical review of world energy, which is now published by the Energy Institute, and it used to be published by BP. It's a big project. They kind of try to pull together data from various sources. And that gets to be an expensive project. And to the extent that the US and China and Russia aren't speaking to each other too well, and the data probably is not exactly right, you know, you would get the idea that if things are down, they might not want to tell you the truth. That kind of thing could be happening. But it's hard to know. You certainly can tell that the population has been going up over the last quite a few years,
Mm,
and that is definitely an issue. But it's something you do worry about. The International Energy Agency, which is the one that's headquartered in Paris, I tend not to use their data for a couple of reasons. One of them is that most of it is behind a paywall, which is expensive to bother with, and it's also a lot of it is lagged by a couple of years.
mm,
And so it makes it difficult. You're still dealing with stuff that's 2 years out of date or whatever. So that becomes a problem. Uh, the US Energy Information Administration Agency, they have pretty decent data, although we don't know how long that will last now too. But it doesn't do as much on an international basis for things like demand and such,
mm.
or
Um,
consumption, we'll say. It's more on production.
yeah. Now, probably the most stunning articles that I saw for you was around the importance of Chinese coal for the shifting of industrial capacity to China. And I think it's such an overlooked critical factor in that story of the West giving up its industrial capacity for China. It wasn't just politics, it wasn't just economics, it was resources. Do you want to briefly retell that story about why those decisions were made?
Well, this is back at the time where they were giving all of these stories about, well, that the that carbon dioxide emissions were the worst things we could ever have. And so that countries needed to reduce their own carbon dioxide emissions. And so they wanted to get buy-in from various countries on doing this. And of course, the way you do that is you please a lot of different people. Well, the people who wanted to make more money from their big companies said, hey, China's got both cheap workers and cheap coal.
Mm,
If we sign on to this, we can expand our big companies to be even bigger, and we can make products much more cheaply than what we're making them now, and it will really help our economy. So I see it as the big push towards the savings on carbon dioxide really is what pushed it towards going elsewhere. It first started out in India and various other places. But in 2001, China was added to the World Trade Organization. And after that, the amount of coal used went straight up
mm,
practically.
mm. Do you think any other parts of the world could repeat that Chinese miracle, or was it kind of the last one of its kind?
It was the last one of its kind. And in fact, China is having difficulty. I mean, what the thing that made it most useful was because it was cheap and it was close by.
Yeah, yeah.
And they have more coal, but it's in remote areas. And trying to get coal back from remote areas is a big headache. And so, I think they've been trucking it over mountains. But this is not what you want to do with coal because it's no longer cheap if you truck it back over mountains. I think they've also been trying to put in long transmission lines and burn it up at that end and then send the electricity back. But that's a real slow project to get going.
Mm.
And I think they've had difficulty like we have. Transmission lines take a long time to build, and they're costly, and there's energy losses in that process too.
And there are very well publicized plans to move industrial production back to places like the United States. Do you see those plans having any viability, or are they kind of oversold promises?
Well, I think the issue is that we can no longer really count on China and other places to be sending us stuff. So we have to start doing this. Also, there's not enough diesel and that kind of thing to keep shipping goods back and forth across the Atlantic and the Pacific. So we have to be building things close at hand. And the way we can do that is using whatever resources we have. But there's a question of whether, we could get the prices up high enough to keep getting enough out at our end.
Mm, mm. Yeah, I think it's a strategically intelligent move, but the scale and the speed at which it can be done will probably be disappointing, but better than nothing.
It's better than nothing, right? But well, the US does have a lot of what's called industry in the US, but quite a bit of it is, food packaging and, making McDonald's hamburgers or something.
Mm,
It's and assembling cars where quite a bit of the parts have been done elsewhere.
mm. Now, looking back in history, tell me if you agree with this, that Europe kind of peaked in terms of coal and industrial capacity in like the late 19th, early 20th century, and the world wars were kind of partly about that. And then the US repeated, I think, in like it repeated that process, and it peaked in terms of coal and domestic production in like the 70s or the 80s. And it looks like the world kind of had a final run with China doing it on like speed running that process. But is that kind of how you now see history as well? And is it kind of the end of that process that industrialization has always been based on coal? And oil was a nice thing to add on top of it for the 20th century. It staved off the coal reaching its limits a bit longer, but we're kind of reaching the end of that process of substituting other forms of energy. And the foundation of coal is fully exhausting in the coming decades.
Yeah, I think of oil and coal as being the two basic fuels because they're easy to transport and store. And so, they're the ones that we've been using all along. And they have been depleting. And compared to population growth, they have been not rising enough to make up for the population growth. So we've been trying to pad what we're getting from oil and coal with natural gas and this and that and the other things, But these other things tend to be more expensive. They tend to be less reliable. They're harder to store. They're not as good as what we were used to. So this is a problem.
Mm. And
For
they're
one,
ultimately dependent on coal and oil for their
right,
production
right.
and maintenance.
And even nuclear
Mm.
depends on coal and oil because that's what we build the plants that use the nuclear power plants
Mm.
with.
Mm, mm. Now, I have another provocative theory. So, a lot of people imagine the distant future of us returning to something like a medieval kind of technology set. And I actually wonder if we might also be reaching the end of the Iron Age because the high quality surface deposits of iron ore have been mined and refined and rusted and lost. We may have a century or two of salvage and recycling of the iron that we've already produced. But have you considered that possibility that iron, if it is present in the future, it might be a much rarer material than it was in the pre-industrial past?
I guess I haven't looked into that, but all every single mineral does tend to deplete. And whenever we try to use something that's so-called recycled, it's always in a somewhat degraded state compared to what we had planned on. You can't get the same purity back, we'll say, that
Mm,
you can if you're starting from the ore. So, if you're trying to make a specialized kind of steel, you're not going to make it from some kind of recycled iron product or even steel product. So it becomes a problem to work with.
mm,
Yeah, but it could be, but you know, you end up with both the coal and the materials you're working with becoming harder to get. And of course, the way we get the iron ore out is with diesel
mm,
usually.
Yeah. Well, I would love to see your perspective on that if you want to dig into it, because I think it's an even bigger macro issue. It's a civilizational turning that's even bigger than the industrial age if we lose iron as a technology. But I mean, you look at civilizations of the New World in the Americas that never had iron or metal tools, and they were spectacular. So I think it doesn't mean we're going back to living in the caves. It might just mean we have to come up with more creative solutions to things that we previously did with metal. Well,
Now,
a rel oh, sorry.
Hawaii was another place that didn't have any metals.
Yeah, they barely had various kinds of stone. So yeah, it can be done. I'm also curious if you've thought about how much of the world's remaining coal reserves would be accessible in a world of declining oil availability, because they tend to be deep, low quality reserves that currently we rely on machines to get out of the ground.
All of these things depend on each other.
Mm,
You tell people about, you're going to have a shortage of oil, and you discover that if your electricity goes out, you can't get the oil pumps, your gasoline pumps to work to fill up your car with. Everything depends on everything else. So if you lose one, you tend to lose several pieces at once.
Yeah, it's a big tangled mess. Um,
Yeah.
do you suspect there might be a wave of deforestation ahead during the decline of industrial civilization as people switch to biofuel as an alternative for heat?
Yes, I mean, that's what happened before. Now we're trying to somewhat allow these forests to grow, but I know even when uh, Greece was in the publicized for having financial problems, they were cutting down the forests wherever they could to find firewood to heat their homes. This is what people do wherever they are. If there's, it's probably not a place that it was intended that logging be done, but they will go steal it
Mm.
if that's what they need to do.
Yeah, yeah, it's a big worry. Now, I'm also curious about your perspective on the role of natural gas pipelines in the last few decades of geopolitical conflict in Europe and the Middle East in particular. Have you looked into that story? I've seen glimpses of it here and there, and I wondered if you've kept track of the of that dynamic.
Well, if you put in natural gas pipelines, well, first of all, that tends to be a less expensive way of shipping natural gas. So it's the preferred method. But if you really want high prices, you better not, and Europe can't pay very well. You want to turn around and sell it to China or whoever seems to be the better paying customer. So then you suddenly have a problem. So, this is one reason why the liquefied natural gas, sometimes called LNG, has become popular. But LNG tends to be much more expensive, especially if you ship it very far.
Mm, mm. Yeah, they seem that infrastructure seems uniquely fragile as well. Even worse than transmission lines.
Yeah, right. Anybody who wants to blow up anything will blow up a natural gas pipeline.
Mm, mm.
And of
Um,
course, they're big.
yeah, yeah. Now, what is your perspective on the potential for nuclear power in the future?
Well, I don't know. We have a huge amount of spent fuel that people originally had thought we would get most of the energy from this fuel. And so it would be, we used to hear the words too cheap to meter. The
Mm,
electricity from nuclear would be too cheap to meter. But in fact, we only got a very tiny percentage out of the uranium. And so we end up with this very hot uh, end product, and we don't know exactly what to do with it, but we don't have a cheap way of getting the uranium or whatever close to it back out again. And that would be someplace, if we could get it to work, it would be nice. There was an article recently that Russia had thinks that they have something that might work by 2030, but people are a little skeptical that they really do. Because if they could get it back, excuse me, and make it uh, and put it into place and reuse some of this and actually get a bigger piece out of it, we'd be in great shape. Uh, but the actual uranium we're getting out of the ground seems to be constrained. We can't get the price up high enough, long enough.
mm,
That's precisely the problem we get with every fuel. It doesn't matter what it is, oil or coal or natural gas or copper or whatever. You can't get the price up high enough for long enough. And so that's why the production goes down.
mm. With really complicated energy technologies, like particularly new experimental forms of nuclear energy, do you suspect that we've left it too late on a civilizational level, that we're too uh, politics and finance is becoming too chaotic to support those kind of research and build out processes?
Well, you would think so. I don't know, if China is far enough along that they could build some more from it. I mean, they've been looking into some of these things. Uh, so it's possible there are some things that could be done But trying to start something from scratch now, it seems like there will be a long gap before it would be ready for implementation. And we're missing so many pieces to try to build the new system up.
Mm, mm.
That's the big issue.
And big energy systems like this take a long time to build momentum because you've got to like develop the theories, train the staff, build the infrastructure. There's so many levels to it. You can't just, suddenly turn around and snap your fingers and create a thorium plant.
Well, and I think what I was told too, way back a while, quite a few years ago, was even if there was an innovation in the oil industry, on average, it took 17 years to get that out widely used. Because once you had already had built infrastructure, you didn't go back and change what you already had,
Mm.
and it takes a while. I think
Yeah,
the other thing I heard was that if you come up with something new, you have to scale it up. I think it's 4 times to get the adequate cost savings. When you do it first, you do it in a lab, and then you scale it up to a little bit bigger size, and then you scale it up to a little bigger size. And anyhow, you have to go through 4 steps,
yeah,
and that takes a long time.
yeah. And each step introduces new surprise problems that you didn't notice on
Right.
the other scale. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what you hear. Yes.
Well, is that one of the things that's happening with renewable energy, like wind and solar, that they're running into interesting systemic effects as they scale up? And they're still not huge, but when they're starting to cross thresholds of penetration into like electricity markets, we're having to deal with extra unexpected problems.
Well, I think part of what's happening is they're discovering, the the renewable energy is not the same as the grid electricity. And you can try to put, one band-aid on it and then another band-aid on it and then another band-aid on it. And you think, oh, maybe this will work. Well, then I think it was back in April in Spain, they had a 10-hour outage, and
Mm,
they had been online for, I think it was the previous weekend, saying, oh, we're very close to 100% renewable energy. Well, a few days later, the grid came down when they did something similar. And the problem was that they had not done enough to compensate for the lack of what's called inertia uh, that you don't get, especially from solar panels and also from wind. You get it from any kind of generation that uses a flywheel.
mm,
So what would happen is that it didn't smooth out things that were going wrong. If there was a temporary glitch, it would bring the whole system down, and that was what they were dealing with.
mm, mm. Now,
And I think there are ways you can do that. You have to attach more flywheels to it, but yeah.
I'm guessing as well that that form of electricity is structurally incompatible with certain technologies that require uninterrupted supply, like smelters. They can't afford to have their incoming power supply just drop off suddenly.
You would think so. Yes,
Mm.
yes, yeah. So you can hear about problems in Australia where they've been trying to use a lot of uh, renewable energy, and then they're trying to make aluminum with it and going, oh my goodness, people, this is ridiculous.
Yeah, 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 yeah. This is more of a political question, but um, I wonder how you see the dynamic between what I think is an increasingly controlling government system that has AI-powered tools, digital tools that allows it to like monitor and control what people are doing. But on the other side, we are going through some kind of reduction in complexity due to hitting resource limits. And how do you see those two opposing forces colliding?
Well, I think maybe what people are aware of is that if a system descends into chaos, then there's practically no way you can get it back, or it's really, really hard to get it back.
Mm,
So if they see that they're headed in a bad direction, the governments will do whatever they can to try to keep things together. And whatever they can seems to be somebody standing up and telling people what to do, or, instituting monitoring devices so that nobody can spend more than such and such, or all
mm.
kinds of different kinds of changes that we're not used to.
I'm taking a similar position. It's kind of a sympathy for the devil perspective that particularly Western cultures, are so used to everything working and being abundant that we don't really have a grasp on how chaotic the situation could become, and that maybe something which looks culturally or politically unpalatable, like some form of authority changing the rules to keep the game going, might be a better alternative to just everything disintegrating apart.
Yeah, well, I've been over to China a couple of different times, and I was surprised at how much, control and such things there are over there. And I can see, that people who are thinking about this are definitely trying to keep things in order. And of course, Japan, when you read some of their statistics and that you see, oh my goodness, they keep a lot of things, detail things that we wouldn't think about. And the young people line up in a straight line behind their leader, and they go to these religious sites together, whatever it is. But they have a great deal more control too over their population than we are used to.
Mm,
So it's something that's done in these highly populated areas, at least the ones that have been able to keep things together, maybe not so much in India, for example.
mm. Well, I wonder if we are a little bit blind to how pervasive surveillance has become in the West. We kind of have this history of believing that we're free and we're individuals and we have all of this autonomy, but maybe the reality isn't quite matching that anymore. That we have this background infrastructure, some of it corporate, some of it government, that is. Uh, Monitoring and nudging our lives in ways that we may not fully appreciate or understand day to day.
Well, maybe I think part of what nudges is our financial situation that we're in.
Mm,
And, if you're in a good financial situation, you can sometimes work around problems. But if your financial situation is pretty limited, then you probably are going to think twice about doing anything that's out of line, because you're depending on a government check for this or a government check for that. And so you're probably more easily controlled.
mm. Well, I also wonder if we were forced to, if the West is set up for some system of rationing, if we do hit like hard resource limits and markets are no longer functioning, is the infrastructure of like digital and programmable money, the kind of virtualization of money, setting us up for that being a possibility in the future?
Well, whoever is doing this seems to think that the electricity will be there for doing this digital
Mm,
money,
mm,
because if the electricity isn't there, and if people don't have computers to work with, they're not going to know what's going to go on. So you've got a real problem there. I'm not sure how well it works, um, but I know that that's what they're hoping. Uh, that they could allocate somehow or other resources. I'm just, I don't know.
yeah,
I,
yeah.
I know when we looked at way back in my Othram days, we looked at what they did in World War II. You're sending out ration booklets and you have to have a complete list of all these people, and going, oh my goodness gracious, this is a mess. And you don't want them to go to the wrong people. And I don't know.
Mm,
Any kind of rationing other than having money available to spend doesn't work very well.
mm. Well, that's kind of the way I'm feeling the future that there'll be a period of techno-authoritarianism, that there'll be the technology, while it works, will be used to structure things more strictly, but at some point that technology is going to fail, and that's going to be an interesting transition to a less complex society. I also wonder, we're now reaching a kind of turning point demographically, that populations look like they're on track to decline quite rapidly around most of the world in a way that surprised, pretty much all of the professional demographers. How do you see the race between population decline and resource decline panning out? And are they linked? Are people choosing to have fewer children because they feel the resource limits making it more and more difficult to have children?
Well, I think what they're seeing is they can't afford to have children given the complexity that they're up against. You buy these washing machines that don't last very long because they're supposedly so energy efficient, and your dishwasher is so terribly energy efficient it doesn't work very well, and your refrigerator doesn't work very well because it's so energy efficient, and then it conks out quickly. The poor people have a hard time of it. Uh, so these people don't really, uh, I think I'm losing my train of
No,
thought.
no,
Maybe
that's
if you
okay.
get that
No, that's okay.
first.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Well, a related question, or at least maybe you've heard the old joke. My my weight is perfect for my height, which varies. I don't know if it's from some old movie somewhere. Some woman saying that she gets taller and shorter and heavier and lighter. And I wonder if that kind of applies to like world carrying capacity. That when we tapped into these industrial resources, the carrying capacity of the planet did shoot up to billions and billions of people, and our
Right.
population adjusted to meet that. And now that those resources are reaching their limits and are eventually going to go away, the population is going to find its way back to some kind of sustainable level. And when you explain that to people, often they think of disasters. There's going to be like piles of body in the streets and wars and screaming. But is there a possibility it's just going to happen steadily by demographics, that the exponential functions surprise people both when they're growing and when they're declining?
Well, I think it's going to be partly by epidemics. That's what's happened in the past,
Mm, mm,
and also by shorter life expectancies. But it's not something that you can expect. Um, I don't know. The population has been growing outside of the what I call the advanced nations, the OECD members, whatever. But the population has been growing in a lot of these countries. In fact, it's been growing in Israel too.
mm,
And so while they may talk about the demographics being important, it takes a lot longer than what you would think because we have been keeping these people alive longer.
mm, mm.
And so the births may be down, but oh my goodness, the population still goes up. And so I see it may be happening, but it's not happening as quickly as you might think. You still have, especially if people continue to live as long as they do.
Mm,
When you look at Africa especially has such a big population and it keeps growing. Um, but there are other countries too, but it's the longer lifespans that has added to the population.
mm. Well, this is another thing I'm getting as many perspectives on as I can. Um, do you think there will be a reimagining of death in the coming century? Particularly like looking at Canada is kind of leading the charge with assisted forms of dying, which it's a very thorny and dangerous issue with lots of examples in history where it's been attempted and gone terribly wrong. But do you think out of necessity that might become something that's viewed very differently, that the end of life will be treated in a very different way?
Well, I'm afraid that it's a necessity. Somehow or other, things are going to have to change so that people, you know, all along, at least in some cultures, there have been traditions where the older people went off to die at a certain point, especially if they were in declining health. And you're going, well, we can't spend thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars on these people. That's what our healthcare system is trying to do, is pump as much money out of these people before they die, or out of whoever is paying for it as they can. And you somehow or other have to say, well, we just have to change this.
Mm,
But it's also happened at the other end of life. We have these preemies who are not doing well. We have babies who clearly have lots of things wrong with them that we are working very hard on saving the lives for. I noticed the Canadian plan had this thing where you could turn your baby in before, I think they were 12 months old. If you decided that this was not going to work, they had too many problems wrong with them, you didn't want them to live to maturity.
mm. Yeah, it's interesting because this culture of the preciousness of life, I think you can trace it back in the West to the last big civilizational decline when the Roman society fell apart. Christianity thrived by rejecting the Roman disregard for the value of the lives of slaves, and of like it kind of took a completely different attitude to how to treat other lives, and that served us very well for the last 2000 odd years. But I wonder if
Yeah.
it's time to re-examine the limits of that, because I mean the people in medieval times didn't have massive populations of 80-year-olds with very limited capacity to enjoy their life.
Yeah. Well, apparently in Japan, there is a tradition of people can go off to the forest or something if they decide that, well, this is the time for the end.
Mm,
Maybe just one particular forest and maybe some tiny amount of people, but there are some things that there are traditions that they don't expect people to necessarily continue to live no matter what, kind of
mm.
thing, the way we do in the West here.
It'll be interesting to see how that culture intersects with the transhumanists who are promising like immortality through high technology, which is a really interesting thing watching that unfold. Just as a note, I'm hoping to write a speculative fiction story about a society that chooses a maximum age that everyone lives to. And
Yeah.
it gets adjusted periodically in response to the economy by like a referendum. And it's a great equalizer that no matter how wealthy you are, everyone knows how many years they have left. And yeah, I think there could be a lot of cultural benefits to that. It's one way of making it a fair system, at least for some of the cases.
Or I guess a variation on that would be that Medicare stops covering you at age 80 or 85 or
Yeah,
whatever it is.
yeah,
And
yeah.
say, well, okay, if you want to pay for extra treatment beyond that, you can, get some minor things done and pay for it yourself, but there's no point in trying to keep you alive till you're 98 or 100.
Mm. And I think it might be a generational issue as well, that the younger generations, as they get to that stage in life, my guess is that they will be more open to different approaches to things. It's going to be interesting to watch that play out. I've also got a question I really wanted to ask you. Do you think our political leaders will ever come clean about resource constraints, or is that political suicide in democracies? What about in China? Do you think they'll ever just like tell people there's not enough coal left to do what we want to do, or is that a different kind of political suicide?
I I think that they're more open to talking about it. I've helped some of the writers over in China put together some papers over there, and but I guess I'm not that close to what exactly is going on in China. I think that they are running short on resources, including some of these things that they're rationing to the West now. And, they are probably embarrassed to tell us that they're running short on them, but that's basically what's behind it.
Mm, mm. I guess it's partly linked to our financial system being in this huge, overbloated, debt propped up kind of monstrosity that it's turned into, that runs on confidence that it's going to keep continuing and everyone's going to get paid what they were promised. Um, how do you see that evolving, that side of the financial system? Is it like, is money so flexible now that it can be stretched effectively to infinity, or is there an inevitable breaking point?
Well, the money is based on government debt. And so if you want more money, the government, well, you can go print some more money, basically. And they figured, oh, this is really good. We'll just keep on doing it. Well, then they got inflation and then they wanted higher interest rates. And now the big talk is about, well, we'll lower interest rates. And the question is, what they'll be lowering is really short-term interest rates. And can they actually get the long-term interest rates to go down the way they'd like them to, especially if the inflation rate goes back up again? So we don't know if that's going to work, but you can't really fix the system the way you'd like to.
I've seen some fringe economists talk about the idea of demurrage, I think it's called, where if you put financial assets like cash in a bank, it actually shrinks year to year rather than grows. And
Oh, yeah.
that changes the whole incentives for using money. Basically, you want to put that money into productive real assets like farmland or a forest that's growing rather than keeping it in that abstract fluid form because it's like a sandwich that decays if you leave it in the fridge too long. You're better off just eating it and making it useful. And it almost feels like the system in its absurdity is evolving in that direction. But it would undercut the power of the moneyed classes because their financial assets wouldn't be exponentially growing anymore. They'd be shrinking, and there'd be a mad scramble to get out of abstract assets.
Well, but I guess I think of it as negative interest
Mm,
rates,
mm,
which is what Japan and Europe quite a bit were doing. People putting money in the bank and they came back and had less in the bank than what it was previously.
mm.
But I, I'm not quite sure the way around this thing. That what happens is that there's fewer goods and services that are going to be made in the future.
Yeah, yeah.
And if you have fewer goods and services, even if you had the same amount of money, it's going to cost more. If you, so let's say you have a stack of gold and you have a group of goods and services, it's going to take more gold for the same amount of services in the future than it does now if that group of goods and services is going down.
Mm.
So you
It,
can't
it's
quite get away with all of this kind of thing.
it's kind of like a through the looking glass economy that everything you had intuitively understood about money is back to front and upside down, and how that actually plays out in whole economy decision-making dynamics is difficult to model in one little
Well,
person's head.
well, and you better make sure you're paying the people, the farmers, or
Yeah,
you won't have any food to
yeah,
begin with.
yeah,
So you've
yeah.
got to take theirs off the top.
Mm,
And in fact, you'd like to take off the top other people who are critical for making the system work. And you probably don't care as much about the 80-year-olds that aren't working.
mm. I also wanted to talk a bit about gold because the US famously removed the gold backing of the US dollar in the 70s, mostly in response to rising oil imports that was threatening the balance of trade. What does the recent run-up in gold prices tell us about what's happening in the financial system?
Well, I think it tells us that people are sort of worried right now. I know there are some people are saying, well, if it runs up quickly, it's going to run right back down quickly again, too. Um, we don't know that. it's, I guess the thing I see about gold is that it's hard to actually buy anything with gold.
Mm,
You know, you have to sell it and then take the dollars and buy your car or house or whatever it is. Uh, if I wanted something that's going to buy a loaf of bread, I'd rather have quarters and dimes and silver than I would, the gold that they're talking about.
mm,
Um, I don't know if the gold is going to do that much. The big issue is going to be not enough food to go around and such things. The governments are going to aim to have their digital money, and that may cut out the use of gold. I just don't know.
mm. Yeah, it's tricky. Like I said, the financial system has become so disconnected from reality, but reality is still there. There still is a gold price, like saying something in the background about
Yeah,
that abstract system, that unreal system.
it
Um,
is.
I,
Yes.
now I wanted to ask a question about you in particular. And what do you think it is about you or people in general that makes some of us capable of staring directly at this problem for a long period of time, whereas a lot of other people get a glimpse of it and the cognitive dissonance kicks in, they don't want to think about it. How have you managed to stay on this topic for so long?
Well, I suppose I don't know if it's math or if it's slightly autistic or whatever it is. It's a different way of looking at things. If I were out there trying to figure out, well, how do I fit in with a group of ladies talking about the latest dress they bought at such and such boutique, I probably would have a hard time with it. Yeah. So I get probably am sort of an oddball in some respects.
How does that work for you when you interact with like your community? Do you often bring up these topics, or have you learnt just it's usually better to talk about the pretty dress?
It's often better to talk about the pretty dress, and if they'd like to look at my website, they're welcome to do it. But unless they want to sit down and read something, I'm not quite sure I can hit them over the head with, well, we got a real problem here.
And it's a tricky problem too because it's a slow moving one. So like often when people catch on to these ideas, they panic because they think it's all going to happen like in a month. And we lived through that with the oil drum. There was that community that found each
Right,
other on the internet and kind of
right,
a decent, I think more than half of them during the global financial crisis got into a panic mode, thinking that everything was about to come crashing down. And I think there
right,
was a possibility that it might have, like without those massive interventions in the financial system, it might have been a
right,
much bigger problem. But
right.
yeah, I wonder how do you deal with people who have started to take an interest in it, but maybe um, need to learn to step back and realize this is a big, slow-moving train wreck.
Well, I have different commenters on my site, and I try to answer whatever question they have. You know, I have a hard time with, people who write to me and say, well, my niece wants to go know what to major in college. And, she'd really like to do such and such. And I'm thinking, oh, goodness gracious, I don't know if it's going to work. I don't know.
I'm also interested if you have any thoughts on the way that being aware of collapse can improve life for individuals or families or communities, and in what ways can it make it worse? Like, how have you seen that play out in your uh, people that you interact with and
Well,
yourself?
I guess the way you can make it better is you can stop and think. You're saying, well, I'm in the best period that there's ever been, pretty much. And
Hmm.
I've had the experience of living through the best period that there's ever been. And, if I happen to have made money one way or another, I can give some of it away to other people, one through what I have managed to come up with. But so there are, the good side of it. Uh, the bad side, I guess it's not as big an issue for me because I'm looking at it and saying, well, I'm relatively old. And so it's not going to be like I was going to count on living another 20 years, even if something didn't happen. So it's not the same catastrophe for me as it is for, say, my grandson.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyhow.
That's definitely a big message I'm trying to get out with this podcast is that we are living in a time, even though there's a lot of stresses and pressures and mess happening, we have unprecedented opportunities to do things now that might have a lasting benefit for future generations and to have a sense of urgency and excitement about that opportunity rather than seeing the whole industrial age as a disaster and we never should have started it. It's kind of a bit late to have that attitude now.
It's not that we shouldn't have started. We got the benefit of it,
Mm.
and we've been living with the benefit of it. And we don't know what will happen ahead. I'm sure that when people, back when Malthus lived, he didn't have any idea that the fossil fuels would be out there doing as much as they were. So if there is something that's totally new that's coming along, we don't know what it is. So it may very well come along. There may
Mm.
be something we just don't understand.
Now, how do you see popular culture processing this unfolding decline? Like, I often wonder if the in the 2010s there was a huge interest in zombies, like zombie apocalypses were everywhere, like hordes of like not quite people that you didn't have to treat like people needing to be fended off. Do you think the anxiety is there on a subconscious level, and that the culture is grasping with it in ways that for people who can't just stare directly at it, like you and me?
Well, I think that there are some video games out there that are aimed at kind of, building a city or whatever it is, and you can get a little idea of what some of the issues are.
Yeah.
Uh, but, and I'm not into video games myself to know what all is going on, but that's probably one way it comes out.
Yeah. Games like Minecraft, where like you start out in with nothing, like building up really simple tools and like rebuilding something of a world. Yeah, I think that is scratching that itch as well too. I also wonder if the popularity of apocalyptic climate change scenarios is kind of tapping into this anxiety that we almost want, on some level, everything to be just destroyed.
Yeah, I think that that's what they're trying to do with that, or yes, that people realize that, well, it can't really work that way. If we could get all of these things out, it wouldn't work.
Mm. I also wanted to talk about that big cycle of interest in peak oil around the global financial crisis in the late 2010s, and then it kind of faded away and dissipated. Do you think we'll have another cycle like that in the future in response to some dramatic attention-grabbing event?
I don't know. The thing is that people assume that there has to be a high price. That if there's a shortage, there'll be a big high price.
Mm.
And so there can't possibly be a shortage if there's not a high price. So there's no problem there.
Yeah.
The,
It's the
the
stealthy
price
disasters that are the ones that sneak up on you.
Yeah, it's a different problem. It's a problem you can't hold the price high enough for the producers is the problem.
Mm.
And they miss that point. And
Interesting.
that's why oil supply goes down is because you can't keep the price up high enough.
Mm.
And that's the same thing you run into with copper or iron ore or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. I think
and
that's one of the most valuable insights that I got from you as well too, that there's this scissor maneuver between price constraints on production and consumption price constraints from the wider economy, that those two are gradually being pincered in until presumably you
yes,
reach a point where you just can't rationalize producing any of that resource anymore.
right, right.
Mm.
Yeah.
Now, you've also occasionally referred to the value of religious communities during times of crisis in your many years that I've been reading you. And how aware are religious institutions of this resource constraint that's unfolding around them?
I don't know. I mean, way back when, there were various liberal churches that would ask me if they could read one of my posts at their church or
Mm,
something. Uh, so you'd find Unitarian or, whatever these groups were that were talking about it. But again, it gets in the news when the oil price is high.
mm,
When the oil price is low, nobody cares about it. They think, oh, the big problem was we've got too much of it, and our big problem is the it is carbon dioxide emissions.
mm. I'm also really curious to get people's ideas on what the cultural impact of the end of the internet might be, because it's the biggest, most complicated machine that we've ever built. And now we're adding AI on top of it to make it even more expensive and complicated and fragile. And at some point, presumably, we won't be able to maintain it in the same way. It'll probably degrade before it disappears. And do you think some groups of people might voluntarily abandon the internet first, like a kind of digital Amish, that they'll just say we are collectively agreeing not to use it anymore?
Well, I think what's happening is the AI is giving this little blurb. If you ask a question for anything, you get a little one paragraph summary. So you don't have to go to the website that you wanted to go to.
Mm,
So the advertisers who are trying to make money off of these websites can't make money off their ads. So they are going to quit their ads for the website. And what will bring the internet down is not enough funds, the people who the advertisers will stop using this mode of trying to get somebody to sell their products.
yeah, yeah. And it's ironic because the internet had barely solved the business model problem of making that advertising work to pay for all of the infrastructure. And then AI, which has an even worse business model, is crashing in on top and just blowing all of that up.
It's craziness. Yes, I agree.
Mm. Now, what general advice would you give to people to make them better prepared for the future? And how do you decide who to give that advice to?
That's a good question. I guess I'm working on that issue now, I think, but I think it's the people who come looking for it as opposed to the general public. And I'd have to try to focus it in on, well, this is what's happening. And, you can try different things, but you have to be aware, just going out and being a subsistence farmer on your own is not the easiest thing in the world to do,
Hmm.
especially if, there's just too much that can go wrong. You need to be with a group of friends who can work together on this project, but you're still going to be lacking for the whole uh, system that we have right now. Somebody that's keeping up the roads and doing all of these other things. Um, I think we can hope there's a God who's looking after us and going to try to fix it for us. But without that help, we really do need some help on this one. We can try to prepare for whatever the next kind of cycle might come along, if there is one, but that's research into something we don't know about at this point in time.
It's definitely a disaster I've seen on multiple occasions. Somebody gets panicked by the story of peak oil and they run out to become a farmer and they hate plants. Like they hate living in rural areas. Like it's the worst possible strategy and reaction that you can have.
Well, I figured, I'll find out how this works, so I broke my wrist the very first time was going to start doing something, going, well, it's kind of hard to be a farmer if you can't do anything with your one hand, one-handed, it's really difficult to do much farming. And
Hmm.
it wasn't like I had a group of family members who were running out to say, hey, we'll help you, we'll do this for you. No, no, if you want to do this crazy project, you do it yourself.
I can relate because I've been running a herd of dairy goats here and doing all of the work myself, and I got really sick last year for a few weeks, and I ended up just giving the herd away because no one else knew how to milk and how to move them and how to handle them. And yeah, it's not an activity that's meant to be done alone.
No, it's not, and if somebody decides they're going to have, solar panels or whatever it is, they better know how to fix problems that come along and figure out you have better have a plan B with any of these kinds of things
Mm.
because at best what you're doing is kicking the problem down the road a little ways.
Maybe that's the whole story of civilization, so we shouldn't feel so bad if we just keep going for another 5 years.
Well,
That's better than nothing.
well, there was a young fellow that back when I was an oil drum who wrote about how they lived in Kenya. And he was saying that, we here have such a high death rate, especially of children and various other things. And he said, well, we focus on today and we don't focus a great deal on what the future is or what the past was. And he gave the example, said if the child dies, you have your funeral service or whatever the same day or right after as quickly as possible, but and you mourn at that time, but the next day you go off and you do your regular things again, and you have to build your life so that you can kind of compartmentalize these things that don't work. Don't focus on them, and don't focus on, oh, I won't, I really would like to go to whatever around the world next month. No, work work on, where you are right now and enjoying that as much as it is. And I think they came back and sang and got together with their friends every evening and rejoiced. It wasn't like they were sitting in front of a television set either. So,
Yeah,
they
yeah.
had some good times with their family members.
Yeah, yeah. Now, I've got a couple of final questions that I ask everyone. And the first one is usually for people who are doing like crop breeding, but I'm really interested to see where you take this. So, if you could wave a magic wand and create a new life form to share with the world, what would you wish into existence? Like, even imagine if you could have been a farmer your whole life and like bred something new, what would you have wanted to work on?
I'm afraid I don't know.
Well, I came up with an alternate question, which I think might be easier for you to answer. If you could create a new cultural institution for your community or for the world, what could you imagine being useful in the future to help people adjust to all of the challenges that are ahead?
Well, I think we're going to have to work on uh, living more closely together, that families, intergenerational families, or, if they're retirees or whatever it is, they're going to have to share homes as opposed to each one having a four-bedroom house that they have, with a yard, and they're supposed to take care of all of this by themselves.
Hmm.
You're going to get people living closer together. I don't know how you get this done in exactly the right order because you want them, yeah, there's probably going to, you don't want to have them all spread out because you've got all these roads you got to keep up too. So somehow or other, you got to work it down to such a way that you're not trying to maintain as much space.
Yeah, it's the lowest hanging fruit in terms of economy of scale is building back up to larger groups of people living together. But we've kind of forgotten how to do that culturally. So finding ways to rediscover that, I think, is a priority in the coming decades.
Yeah, well, and I think it's happening to some extent. You know, the young people today sometimes are, when they can't afford a whole apartment, they're getting together and they together rent an apartment. I know way back before my daughter got married, she was sh sharing an apartment with several others, and they would have a bulletin board of who does what, who cleans what, who does everything. And then if somebody left, then they would they put an ad in the paper or whatever it was, and they asked for applications for somebody who'd like to come and get a bedroom plus a share of using the living space otherwise.
Mm.
And they added some other rules, like we don't want any males under 25 years of age because too often they come back drunk and we don't like that. That
Yeah.
disturbs our peace, you know. But it wasn't that they were friends who were living together. They were people who were trying to make a go of it in a space uh, that would work for them.
I
And
oh, sorry,
yeah,
you were saying no. I was going to say I wonder if figuring out ways to do that so younger people can have children is going to be really vital for balancing out the demographic decline because so many people they're just too insecure and too lacking in resources to even think about having children until they're like in their late 30s, and often it's too late by then. And I wonder if
right,
there could be a cultural flip where young people achieve those economies of scale in the way they organize their lives, that they could actually have at least one child earlier and not put a bet on having them later in life.
right.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. So this has been an amazing conversation. Where can people find more of your work to read? I highly recommend people check out the very data based articles that you write on a regular basis. There's no one else doing the work that you're doing.
Well, well, thank you. I write on ourfiniteworld.com. That's OURFINITEWORLD.com.
I'll put the link in
Uh,
the show notes.
well,
I'll put the link in the show notes too, so it's easy to find.
okay, thank you.
Mm. Are there any lectures or talks that you have done that you would recommend? I might be able to find them on YouTube and put in the links as well.
I guess the short answer is no.
Okay, okay. All right. Well,
I'm
you heard from
supposed to
her
be,
live today.
uh, I'm I'll have to get back to doing that kind of thing. I'm supposed to be speaking at a Sierra Club group thing uh, in less than 2 weeks.
Oh, brilliant, brilliant. Well, these episodes will be coming out over the next 6 months, so I will make sure that I time the release of this episode around that. So I'll look up the
I'm
details if I
not
can find it.
sure. I'm not sure that they're well enough financed that it's going to be quote coming
Ah,
out
okay,
very much. I don't know,
okay.
um, but we will see. Um, if I had a really good solution to all of this,
Yeah,
probably I would he could go around and speak everywhere, but I don't
yeah.
have as much of a good solution as I completely would like.
Yeah, yeah. Well, at any rate, I'm extremely grateful I got a chance to talk to you today and to get your perspective on a whole bunch of interesting topics, and to thank you too for all of the amazing work that you've done over the years. I think it's a perfect example of using the internet that we have today to the best possible use for not just you, but for everybody.
Yeah, well, I feel like it's sort of a my website's sort of like a self-organizing system. These people who are interested in it come in, on a regular basis to provide things that they've run into and to comment on things other people have done. And, they're the ones that have insights in a particular area. So I've run into a lot of different things I wouldn't have otherwise.
Mm,
And it's allowed me to bring together all these people coming from different um, you know, siloed communities.
mm,
The people at university systems tend to operate in silos. So the people who are in the economists don't ever talk to the physicists,
Mm,
and the physicists don't understand enough about the subject to even explain how this translates into a financial implication.
mm,
So they're really rather confused. They want to, uh, they don't, what they want is their next article published. So they're not going to say anything that rocks the boat at all.
yeah, absolutely. Well, and I also hope that you might one day write an article about the future of the iron industry. That if my instincts are correct, that it may not be something that people are using commonly 1,000 years from now. And I think that opens up other possibilities.
Yeah, well, if there's only a few people, then they can do it more, but still, I don't know. Yeah,
Uh,
I don't know. Yes.
mm.
Well,
Okay.
thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. And I'll let you know when this is about to come out.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
You can read more of my work at the Recombination Nation Substack. Sign up for free for weekly emails, or grab a paid subscription to unlock the archive and grab a copy of the audiobook of Taming the Apocalypse. Up next, I'll be talking to Chuck Chan, a amateur crop breeder from California working on Mashua and Tamarillo.